open with me to Exodus 3. We're going to look at the first 4 verses here in Exodus 3. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, and yet the bush was not consumed. And so Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Who initiated the call of Moses' life? God did. Can I choose my calling? Can't choose my calling. If Moses were choosing his calling, would he have ever chosen what God assigned him? He would have never chosen that. We see that as we go on through the call and all of the responses that he has. He would not have chosen to have that call on his life. But I don't choose my calling. You don't choose your calling. Back to the premise of the study, which is there is a huge upper story that's going on, which you and I don't fully understand. We know major pieces of it. We understand as we go along, we're learning to see how God interacts with man and God's overall purpose with man. But do I understand it in totality? No, I don't. I don't. So I can't decide what my calling is, because God has the big picture. I do not. God must initiate that call on my life. If I would choose it, what would I choose?
Something that pleased you.
Something that pleased me, something that was easy, something that didn't make me uncomfortable, something I thought I was kind of pretty good at, right? These are how I would. Do you think any of those fit Moses' call? None of those. It wasn't anything he thought he would be good at. It wasn't anything easy. It wasn't anything that would come comfortably for him. It wasn't anything that wouldn't require him to make a lot of adjustments. It was none of those things. It was the opposite. He would have never chosen for God to call him to that. But that was God's calling on his life, and God initiated that call, and God always initiates the call. I'll give you a couple of other good examples. We won't read them in the interest of time. The first one I gave you was 1 Samuel 3, 1 through 10. Do you remember the call of Samuel? What was Samuel doing? He was sleeping. He had laid down to go to sleep. And he hears his name. And he thinks, what? Well, it must be the priest. He must be calling me. So he runs in there and he's like, yep, here I am. And he said, I didn't call you. Go back and lay down. And that happens repeatedly until finally he explains to him, look, this is God calling you. Lay down and say, here I am. You know? Was Samuel trying to get God to call him? Had he suggested to God, God, you should call? He didn't do that. God reached out and called Samuel. That wasn't Samuel who initiated that. God initiated that. How about Saul in the New Testament prior to being Paul? Saul already was firmly convinced he was right in the middle of God's will for his life, busily persecuting Christians. You could not have convinced him otherwise. He was absolutely certain that persecuting Christians was God's call on his life. But what happens? While he's out in the midst of that, what happens? God calls. And for the first time, Saul realizes, this was never God's call on my life. This is God's call on my life. And it would be to what? To go reach the Gentiles of all things. He would eventually come to understand. I can't determine God's call on my life. I can't initiate it. God will do that. He initiates the call. I can't initiate the call. I don't know the big plan. That's the major problem is I don't know the big plan. So I can't make the call. He has to do that. The second thing we learn from Moses' call is there are no qualified responses. And what do I mean by that? Qualified as in I require certain limitations or conditions. Have you ever done this? Well, if you do this, I will do that, God. When you do this, I will do that, God. Well, I would, but first this, and this, God. It's me putting conditions on whether or not and when I will respond to that call. Let me give you a good example. Look there in Exodus 3, look at verse 13. Yeah, let me look in here. I'll make sure I read the right one. Moses said to God, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now that you may say to me, what is his name, and what shall I say to them? That is not the one I want. It begins with, and I will find it here in just a minute. He says, if I go down to them, what am I going to say to them? He says, if I go down and I tell them what you told me, if I do that, well, then what would I say? It starts with the whole premise of, well, if I were to do that, when God places a call on my life, I cannot begin to second guess whether or not I'm going to do that. There are no ifs. If he has called me to it, and we'll look at this later, if he has called me to it, it is his call on my life. Whether or not I see how that could work, whether or not I think I have the capacity to do that, whether or not I think I have the resources to do that, whether or not I think I have the time to do that. It's not an if. It's not an if. But have you ever felt God's call in your life to do something and you begin to think, well, if I did that, but this, that would mean that, would mean them, that would mean there. There are no ifs. God places a call on my life, there are no ifs. That's the point at which I have to realize this is part of the upper story. This is God's call on my life. He already has this all figured out. He doesn't need me to figure out if this could possibly work. He's already worked through that. He already has it planned. There are no ifs. There are no buts. In 4:1, Moses said, what if they won't believe me or listen to me to what I say? But they're not going to hear me. They're not going to listen to me. But God, you don't understand. I don't have that kind of money. But God, you don't understand. I'm not gifted in that way. But God, you don't understand. I'm really not equipped to do this right now. But, and I begin to give him reasons why I can't imagine how that would possibly work. Here's a question for you. Are you to think of something that he didn't think of first? Do you think God went, yeah, you never thought about that. They might not believe you. You're right. I'm not going to think of something God hadn't already resolved. All this thinking through is to imply that he doesn't have a plan that he's fully vetted and sure is how he's going to do it, and that he's already equipped and empowered me to do it. It's not if. It's certainly not but. The next thing he throws at him is, I think, verse 10. He says, well, I'm just not qualified. He says, I've never been eloquent. I'm just not a good speaker. You need a good speaker. God, that's what you need. You need a really eloquent speaker. Because God needs somebody down here's skills to accomplish his purposes. Is that true? Will God's purposes be accomplished because of some skill that I have? God's purposes will be accomplished because he is God and he always accomplishes his purposes. Not because I happen to be a really good speaker. Not because I happen to be a really good anything. We look at our set of skills and we decide whether or not we're qualified to do something. God looks at my set of skills and says, you're not qualified to do anything, but I will qualify you and I will equip you and I will use you if you will let me. I'm not looking for your inherent qualities. I know exactly what they are. I made you. I know exactly what your limitations are. I made you. What I'm looking for is for you to be usable. That's all I'm asking for you. It's for you to be usable. And unqualified, I'm going to warn you, makes you eminently choosable. Because that's his favorite people to use. Had Noah ever built a boat? Noah had never built a boat. Had Abraham ever started a nation? Abraham had not even been able to bear children. Go down the list of the people that God uses. Joseph, what qualifications did he have? He had none. David, what qualifications did he have? None. God loves to use unqualified people because they're totally dependent on him. So if you're thinking that the excuse you have is that you're not qualified, you are in some big, deep trouble. Because that is exactly the people he's looking for. That's the people he gets the glory from. Those are the people that are totally dependent on him. And in 4:13, he just really gets right down to it, and he just says, send somebody else. Can you just send somebody, anybody else? Send someone else. I am just not your guy. Do we use that sometimes? Ask somebody on a nominating committee how many times they hear that. Somebody else. Call somebody else. Ask somebody else. We love to opt in. I would like to make a donation. You know why? Because that puts the ball back in their court and they have to find somebody to actually go put feet and hands to it. Send somebody else. God's call on my life is for me. It's not for somebody else to do. Can't pay somebody else to do it on my behalf. Can't shake it off on somebody else. Say, well, they have more time, or they have better resources, or they're more talented. You should really call them. Send somebody else. Moses tried it. He just said, Lord, send somebody else. Didn't work either. And then there's one response that we don't see here, but I couldn't pass this up, is Jonah. You remember Jonah's response? You know, there's really nothing recorded that he said anything after God called on him. He never actually said anything. He just beat feet. He just hooked them. He went and he got on the first boat he could find. Opposite direction, Tarshish, absolutely the opposite direction, and went, see ya, ain't gonna be ya, ain't gonna do it. He does not speak to God again, as far as we know, until he is literally in the belly of a fish. And from the belly of a fish, he suddenly feels the call of his life. You do not want to wait till you're in the belly of a fish to respond to God's call in your life. That is my advice to you, because it can happen. You look up and you're the one being thrown by the seat of your pants off the boat, and you're the one in the belly of the whale going, you know what? I feel like spreading the gospel, and then it's just come over me. I think I would like to do that. The no response, I'll ignore it, I'll just jump ship and run. Doesn't work either. God equips who he calls. He does not call us and then leave us to figure it out or to fend for ourselves. You know, I think that's part of our fear in responding to God's call is, well, when I step out on this, what if I get out there and I'm way out on a limb and I don't know what to do? I'm in way over my head. What would I do? God will never call you unless he equips you. And he didn't call Moses and fail to equip him. He equipped him first with the plan. He gave him the plan. He told him exactly what's going to happen. You're going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to demand that he release my people. He's going to reject that. I'm going to give you each command as you go. And basically, you're my mouthpiece. This is it. You will go, and I will tell you what to say, and you will say it. And I will make it happen. This is the plan. He gave him a plan. How do we want to do it? I want to be in control of the plan. I want to be in control of the plan, and I want to be fairly assured that I can affect the outcome of the plan when I go in. I mean, I don't want to go in and put that out there and then maybe it doesn't happen because I have no control. What if it doesn't happen that way? That's called faith. That I go and I say what God tells me to say, and I leave the results to God. It wasn't Moses' job to produce gnats. He just went and said, oh yeah, they're coming. Gnats, flies headed your way. They're coming. If you don't let the people go, water's going to turn to blood. It wasn't his job to make it happen. God, he left that in God's hands, that God would accomplish that. The reason I can't make the plan as much as we like to try that is, one, I don't have the wisdom. I don't know the upper story. So I'm not equipped to write the plan. I can have all the planning committee meetings I want to. Here's the problem. I don't have the upper story to write it for him. So I don't have the wisdom. And two, on top of all of that, I don't have the power to make it come true. I don't have the power to accomplish it. Here's the difference. If God says, go tell them there's gnats coming, Moses goes and says, there's gnats coming if you don't let the people go. Guess what? Gnats are going to come. Why? Because God has the power to make that happen. I don't have the power to make that happen. I can write the best plan in the world. I can get all the people lined up. I can have committees on top of committees. And I can say, let's go out and let's do this. You know what the problem is? I cannot make it produce fruit. Why do we have so many programs that never really bear fruit? because we thought them up. And I can think them up, and I can staff them up, and I can make sure they happen every week. Here's what I can't do. I can't bear fruit. Only God can do that. So am I wasting my time cooking up my own plans? Much better to wait. That's one problem we have. We don't like to wait on God. We don't like to relinquish control. Because God's going to call on us to do something we might not have the resources or the people or the facilities to do. But if God speaks it into being, if it's His plan, I don't have to worry about all that. Why? Because He's already got the facility picked out. He's already got the people. He's already got the resources. He can make all that happen. And He can produce fruit. I can't do any of that stuff. I don't have the power and I don't have the wisdom to be writing my own plans. God has to provide the plan. And He did. He equipped him with a plan. He equipped him with His presence. What did He promise to Moses? Look at chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" And He said, "Certainly I will be with you. This shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you." He goes on to explain, "I will be with you." When Moses passes and Joshua steps up and becomes God's chosen man, you know, the first thing when He speaks to him and about the covenant is He promises, "I will be with you. I will be with you." What is the last thing Christ said when He left this earth? "Lo, I'll be with you always to the end of the earth. I will be with you." He equips me with His presence. What I could never do on my own. What I would never think of attempting on my own. He says, "Look, you're not going to be alone. Ever. If you are doing what I called you to do and you are where you're supposed to be, I will be with you. Right there. I'm right there. I will equip you with a plan." I already have a plan. I don't need you to think one up. I don't need you to make one happen. I have a plan. I will be with you. I promise you my presence. Moses knew that when he went and he stood before Pharaoh, they only saw him. What Moses knew is, "Oh, but I'm not here by myself. You just think you're looking at me, and you think, who is he? He's Moses." What I'm telling you is, you see me, what I'm telling you is, God is here with me, and God has spoken, and this is going to happen. He promised His presence as He led them. We'll talk about this a little bit later, actually, but as He then, after He gets them out and He leads them through the wilderness, what do they have? You remember? Sign of God's presence. The cloud and the pillar. That's right. He stayed with them and He was present in a way that they could understand all the way through it. He said, "I've got a plan, and I assure you my presence." Third thing was power. He promised him power. And what did He use? What did He give him in the way of power? Do you remember? The rod. You remember the rod? Okay, how creepy is that? And you throw it down, it turns into a snake. That's pretty wild. When He tells me to pick it up by the tail, just don't know if that's going to happen. Every time I read that story, I think He reached over and picked a snake up by the tail. I just don't know that I don't know. This is where I have to say, okay, I'm with you on the Pharaoh thing. The tail and the snake, not so much. He empowered him in a way that he could never have empowered himself. There is no way Moses could have empowered himself the way God empowered him. Does he empower us today supernaturally? How does he empower us today supernaturally? By the Holy Spirit. It's God's plan, it's God's presence, it's God's power. That has not changed. His call on your life is still the same. He promises you that he has a plan, that he will be present with you, and that he will empower you. Upper story, this is how God deals with man when he calls on your life. He will give you a plan. He will give you his presence and he will give you his power, but you have to step out. You still got to show up. Moses still had to show up. He still had to go stand before Pharaoh and speak those things. No small feat. Terrifying for Moses. We know that because look how hard he worked to try and get out of it. He was terrified of the very prospect. The plagues in the Passover, as we look at the plagues, does anybody ever question why so many? That's a lot of plagues. Like a lot of, I mean, God could have gone in there and just did the whole, 30 days, firstborn, nothing, do it or don't, and been done with it. Why all these plagues? Why so many? This stretched out over 9 months. This is a long period of time this went on. Why?
Maybe because he's trying to give it time.
Time?
Time to come to him, do the right thing.
God's patience?
Maybe you wanted Pharaoh to see this.
Reveal himself? Both good, really good answers.
Well, the people themselves saw God's power.
Very good answer. Oh, y'all are all over it. Y'all are all over it tonight. God revealed himself to his people in this way. If you look at Exodus 14, verse 31, when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. He used it to reveal his power and his faithfulness to his people. That was part of it. That's one part of it, okay? They had been living in a pagan culture for 430 years. We forget that. For 430 years, they have been in Egyptian exile. His people. They need to see him work in a mighty and powerful way to grow their faith so that they are ready to undertake the next step, which is what? To go to the promised land. So he is getting them ready, and he is showing his power. He is showing his sovereignty. He is showing that he is a covenant-keeping God. All of these things is plague after plague after plague. His people go, wow. And their faith grows. And you and I grow the same way. As we see God accomplish things around us and in our lives, our faith grows. I've seen God do this and my faith grows. Well, I've experienced God doing this in my life and my faith grows. Well, God was faithful when this happened in my life and my faith grows. That's how he grows our faith, is by us experiencing him at work around us and in us. It also confirmed that he was using Moses. I don't know if you caught that in that verse. Because, Moses was concerned. They're going to think I'm a nut. I just go trotting in there and tell them, well, I had a bush and it didn't burn up. And God spoke out of this bush and it was on fire. He says I'm supposed to go challenge Pharaoh. And they're all going, you are crazy. So this also helped confirm for them that he was God's man, that what he was saying was from God, as they saw God accomplish thing after thing after thing that Moses told them would happen. So it was very important for them to understand that Moses was God's chosen man for this purpose. The second thing is that God reveals himself to the world through judgment. God reveals himself to us to grow our faith. Okay? But we're in a relationship with him. A lost world that is not in a relationship with him sees him manifest himself through judgment. That is one way that God shows people his sovereignty and his power is through judgment. If you look at Exodus 9:16, but indeed for this cause I have allowed you to remain in order to show you my power and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Did it work? I'll tell you how we know it worked. What happens when they get to Jericho? A long time down the road, it's over 40 years later, right? What happens when they get to Jericho? How did the people of Jericho respond?
They're scared.
They were terrified. Why? Because they had heard about this God who inflicted all these plagues on the people of Egypt. And they said, oh, it's that God. He's not messing around. Their God is with them, and he does what he says he's going to do. So does it work when God uses judgment to reveal himself to a lost world? Oh, it works. It works. They see how powerful God is, and they see that God is with his people and that he will not tolerate his people being abused. They see it. So one was to grow his own people. Another is to reveal himself to a lost world, and he does that by way of judgment. I gave you some other examples there if you want to look at those where he says, I'll do this and then they will know that I am God. He just flat out says, this is why I'm doing these things. It's so that a lost world sees and knows, I'm not kidding around, I am God. He's also glorified in this situation because he reveals his power over the Egyptian gods. Realize this is a polytheistic culture, okay? They worship every god, like gazillions of gods, more gods than you can imagine. They have a god for literally everything in Egypt. Pharaoh was worshipped also as a god. He was considered to be a god. I gave you a list here. I'm just going to run down it. But I want you to understand that each of those plagues, which to you and I seem rather random, in fact challenge the primary gods of Egypt. Turning the water to blood, there are 3 gods that should have been able to keep that from happening. If they were gods, they should have been able to protect their water supply. They could not. There is actually a frog goddess. There's something. The frog goddess Hepi that should have prevented that plague from happening. Was totally unable to stop it. There is a god of lice. What? Should have been able to stop it. A god for flies. The disease on the cattle, there were 3 different gods. The boils, there's a god of epidemics that should have been able to stop that. 2 gods of healing, one of which is Imhotep, if you know, that was a major god. The hail, there were multiple gods. Locusts, darkness. Each of these challenged a specific god that Egypt currently worshipped. And he is showing his sovereignty over them with every plague. He said, oh, you pray to Imhotep? Yeah, well, watch this. Oh, you pray to Re, the sun god? Well, watch this. You pray to Osiris? You worship Osiris? Okay, well, watch this. So he was just nailing one Egyptian god after another Egyptian god after another Egyptian god. And whether or not Pharaoh was getting it, what we do know is along the way there were Egyptians who were getting it. Because when they finally leave There are Egyptians who load up and leave with him and go, you know what? Our God's not much help. Your God actually does what he says he's going to do. Our gods, yeah, they did me no good. None. So Pharaoh may not have gotten it, true enough, but there were Egyptians who did. So why 10? Because with each plague, some more people began to go, I don't know about our gods. They just don't seem to be doing much. Like, all this stuff is happening. But their God, man, he's all over it. Everything he says, it happens. So with each successive plague, yes, there's a part of it that's God's patience, which gave people time to choose to worship him as they saw one after another of their gods fall to him. Last of which was Pharaoh. And where do we first see Pharaoh? Not in this story. Let's go back to the beginning. Where do we first see Moses? No, we see him before then. Where do we first see Moses? In a basket. Why was he in a basket? Pharaoh was doing what? Oh, he was killing all the firstborn. Remember that? He ordered all the firstborn killed. So what's the last plague? God goes, oh yeah, and about that firstborn thing, gotcha, you're going to want to watch for yours. Because that's where I'm headed next. You wanted to wipe out all the firstborn males of the Hebrews? Well, I tell you what, tonight everybody doesn't have blood over the door. Will not have a firstborn when they get up in the morning. God didn't randomly pick that. That goes back to how this story started. This story with Moses started with him getting stuck in a basket to be hidden, to be preserved. And he was. He was. God preserved him. He preserved all the ones that he put blood over the door facings. And you know what God was not able to protect his firstborn? Pharaoh. These are not random plagues. There is a reason for these plagues. There's a reason they happened in the order they happened. And there's absolutely no mistake about why the last one went straight at Pharaoh. Oh, you're a god? Pharaoh's a god? Okay. We'll see. We'll see if he can protect your firstborn. Because I protected mine. He's standing right here, little Mr. Moses that was floating around the boat. He made it. We'll see where yours are tomorrow morning. This is no mistake how this happened. There was much reasoning and thought. Could you and I have come up with this elaborate plan? Do we have the power to make that happen? No. Did any skill set Moses could have had, would it have made any difference in this plan? No. This is how God works. I gave you a Revelations reference there. Read it when you have time. You're going to recognize the story. Tell you everything in the Old Testament foreshadows something in the New Testament. Read Revelation 17:1 through 18:8, and you will see the Exodus happen again in Revelation. Oh my gosh, why the Passover? It's the upper story. The Passover, if you just look at it, as we say, lower story tunnel vision, this is a rather bloody and creepy story, isn't it? Like if I told you to go kill a lamb and smear its blood all over your door and then get in the house and hide behind that blood, it's pretty creepy. It's scary stuff. If I had to do that today, it would still freak me out. But it was a picture that God was drawing for us of what would eventually happen when the ultimate Passover would come. And so there's a reason behind all of it. First thing is God finally identifies his people as a nation. They have never been a nation up to this point. They've been nomadic, and for the last 430 years, they have lived in Egyptian exile. But they have never been a nation. Coming out of Egypt, they are now a nation, and they are headed to their promised land. They will have a nation of their own. This is the beginning of God declaring them a nation. What else do we learn from the Passover? That God protects His people. That blood over the door was all that was required to protect the firstborn. Now, if I'm trying to protect my firstborn, what would I think? I would be barring the door. I would have weapons. I would be hiding my child. I would be doing all. God said, you just put that blood over the door. And when my avenging angel comes through, he will pass over you and keep going. Hence the Passover. He will pass over you. I'm capable of protecting my people. Pharaoh could not. I can protect them. You do what I tell you to do. You be obedient. Blood is required. That's the next thing. The blood is what protects people from judgment. Could not be any more clear than in this story. All that stood between them and death was blood. Blood on the door. That's it. Blood is all that stands between you and I and judgment. That's it. Not anything I do. Not any rules I keep. Not how many times I attend church. Not how many good acts I think I've performed. There is one thing that stands between me and judgment, and that is blood. And He's showing them, even here, now, there's only one thing that's going to stand between you and judgment, and that is blood. And the blood of what? The Lamb. It is the blood of the Lamb. Centuries later, would that become very clear what that meant? It really would. And God is just in His judgment. And there are people that would say, well, look at that. How many, those innocent firstborn that God took. I mean, look at it. God took all these firstborn. Somebody said, and I can't remember which one of you said it, when I said how many plagues, why? And they said because it was God's patience, basically, giving it. God tried again and again and again. He showed them again and again and again. Look, when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. You know what? They had 9 plagues to figure it out. They had 9 plagues. Could He have come in the very first rattle out of the box and said, I'm giving you 30 days, and then I'm taking your firstborn, and you're letting my people go? Or that's it. He could have. He didn't. He gave them warning after warning, opportunity after opportunity. God's judgments are just. You couldn't argue with that. He didn't have to give them that period of time. Or make it available to the Egyptians. Why even make it available to them at all? I mean, those aren't His chosen people. He didn't covenant with them. Why let any Egyptians in? But He did. Anybody who would put blood over their door, their firstborn would be spared. So He gave them, they had the same warning that the Hebrews had. All they had to do was put the blood over the door, and they chose not to. God's judgments are just. And it foreshadowed Christ as the Passover lamb. That's the obvious one. I always say, what you see in the Old Testament is a foreshadowing of the New Testament. This is certainly a big one. This foreshadowed Christ as the Passover lamb. I would love to go through number 5 with you, but I can't because it's 10 minutes till 7:30. Holy smokes. Okay. What do you learn about God? That where God calls, He precedes. God always goes ahead of us. Here's what doesn't happen. God doesn't send me in there and then come along behind me if I get in over my head. Where God calls me, He's already there. He's ahead of me. He's already made provision for me. I'm not going to get out ahead of Him and then He shows up late and goes, oh, well, I'll fix that. God precedes me. He preceded them right through the Red Sea. Who do you think parted that thing? He didn't come behind them. He went ahead of them. They crossed over on dry land. When they're in the wilderness, they are led by what? We talked about it earlier. The cloud and the pillar. He went ahead of them. God precedes me. He's never going to send me out somewhere that He hasn't already gone ahead of me and prepared for me beforehand. I don't have to worry about that. Where He leads, He provides. When He led them, He provided what? He provided water? Manna. What else does He provide? Quail on one event. Everything in the Old Testament foreshadows something in the New Testament. Why water? Christ is the living water. Oh yeah, okay. And why bread? Christ is the bread of life. He even eventually tells them in the Gospels, look, the manna. That was me, right? That was me. I'm the manna. These little details, they're not just details. They're foreshadowing what's to come. And He's saying, look, I will provide for you. I will not leave you out there strung out without. I will go ahead of you. And I will be there providing for you. It's my plan. I've already gone ahead of you. I've already got your provision. What I need you to do is to walk in obedience where I send you. What God requires. This is really all about, who God is and how He deals with us and how He calls on our life and how He reveals Himself to us and how He reveals Himself to a lost world. But very little, as we saw, was required from Moses himself. All the things that Moses thought were impediments were in fact what? They were irrelevant. They were totally irrelevant. Because God had already provided. God had already gone ahead. God had already empowered him. God already had a plan. All that stuff was irrelevant. What God needs is really a couple of things. He needs us to be humble enough to be dependent. And He needs us to be holy. Humble because if I'm not humble, I will try to take it over and do it myself. I will try to come up with my own plan. I will try to make it happen under my own power. He can't use me. I have to be humble enough to be dependent. So that His plan happens His way in His time, and He gets the glory. That's a big deal. The second is I have to be holy. Why? Why is that such a big deal? Other than you've always been told you should be holy. That was the point. We forget this. That was the point. He called aside people to enter into a covenant relationship with them so that they would live holy and devoted to Him, and thereby people would see how God took care of His people, provided for His people, and accomplished things to His people. They would be drawn to God because of these people and their holy lives. Well, all the delivering me out of Egypt in the world doesn't do any good if once I get out, I don't live holy. Because what does happen eventually? We know they get into the promised land and they don't do what? They don't live holy lives. And they leave the Canaanites in there amongst them. And they begin to worship idols. And what happens? The whole thing falls apart. Why? Because God wasn't a faithful covenant-keeping God? No, because they wouldn't be holy. They refused to be holy. What's the problem today? We have to live holy lives. All the miraculous deliverances in the world don't negate the fact that if I get out, then I proceed to live a life that is not holy. He delivers me out of sin. He delivered you out of sin. But then I have to choose to live holy, not turn around and go right back to tolerating sin in my life. He delivered me. I have to choose to live free from sin. There it is. How many times did we hear the Egyptians, the Hebrews say, well, we should just go back to Egypt. We ate better in Egypt. At least in Egypt we had water. Well, we should just go back to Egypt. Over and over you hear, we should have never left. We should have just stayed. Because being a slave was great. But we do the same thing. We turn around. God delivers me by His blood and His power out of sin. And then I just go, you know what? I think I'll just keep living in sin. What's the point? He didn't deliver me from it so I could go back and live in it. If we're not holy, His purpose is not accomplished in me. That was His purpose for me. Is that people would see me and that I would be different. And they would go, I don't know what's different, but I want what she's got. I want that. We have to be humble. We have to be useful. And we have to be holy. It doesn't ask a lot from us. His plan, His presence, His power, He delivers everything. He accomplishes it all. We don't have to come up with it. All I have to do is be humble and holy. That's my part. The last thing is what He purposes, He accomplishes. What did God say He was going to do? Let's look at Exodus 6. Starting in verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For under compulsion he shall let them go. Under compulsion he will drive them out of his land. God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Lord, I did not make myself known to them. And I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned. Furthermore, I heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, I will deliver you from their bondage, and I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. Abraham from the beginning knew that they would go into exile. They would live in exile for 430 years, and then they would be delivered out before they ever went to the promised land. Did that happen? That's exactly like he said it was going to happen. What God purposes, He accomplishes. You and I can plan and plan and plan. And purpose and purpose and purpose. We lack, however, the ability, the power to make anything happen. What God plans, what God purposes, God accomplishes. Upper story, you and I are not writing that. We're not writing that story. That story's already written. It was written before the foundations of the earth were laid. I'm not going to change what my call is. I'm not going to change what my role is. I'm not going to change God's eternal purposes. My job is to align myself with the call He has on my life. I don't have to understand. I don't have to feel equipped. What talent would I bring to Him that He desperately needed? He knows exactly what my talents are. He knows exactly what my weaknesses are. If He calls me, does He probably know what He's doing? He knows what He's doing. Does He need me to explain me to Him? I think He needs me to explain me to Him. He made me. Did God know Moses was not an eloquent speaker? I think He probably had a pretty good idea, since He made it. He had been providing for him since he was placed in a little reed basket floating around in a river. And Moses stands up and says, oh no, you should send somebody else. You should find someone else. I'm like, no, I had you picked out way back then, sucker. This is your call. This is you. This was all set in motion long before now. Is there a call on your life that you have debated? Ever debated with God's call on your life? He knows what He's doing. Wait for it. Don't try to help Him. Sarah did that. It's a terrible idea. Don't try to help Him. You just want it with Ishmael's. Wait for His call in your life. And then when you hear that, when you see it, when God reveals it to you, trust Him. He's got a plan. It may not make any sense to you. Trust Him. He's capable of accomplishing His purposes, even with us. Even with us. Questions, comments, thoughts? What you see this week? What's God showing you? Are you getting the upper story? Or are we beginning to see upper story yet when you read? Y'all been quiet. You've been quiet. What'd you see this week? I'm going to make y'all testify if I haven't choked it out of you. What did God show you this week?
God doesn't need our help.
No. He doesn't need my help. He chooses to let me be a part of His plan. Definitely does not need my skill set for anything. No. it all to erasure. Bells?
From the very beginning, he's shown his love for our students.
Oh. Yeah. And how do we doubt that, you know? How do we ever doubt that? And there's like this big whole book all about it. How God has pursued us over and over, despite our failure to cooperate. Somebody else?
I really love that there were Egyptian gods that should have prevented those plagues. I
Right?
think that is
Awesome.
really.
It's lost on us because we don't come from a polytheistic culture. So it's lost on us. We're just like, man, you know, all I'm thinking is, I hate flies worse than anything. That would have been the one that got me. I cannot stand flies. That, I'm thinking that he would have had me at flies. I'm like, oh, if you'll take the flies, you can have them. Just take the flies.
But it had such a deeper meaning. That
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, well, and for me, the last one with Pharaoh is to think of, because we forget, Moses began in a boat, in a little reed boat, because Pharaoh was going after the firstborn of the Hebrews. We forget that. We don't make that. When we begin to read the Bible in chronological order, then you start to connect some dots that you might not have connected in the past.
Do you think that the reason Moses was in the boat and then was raised by Pharaoh's daughter is because that way he knew the workings of the Egyptian government and, you know, their ruling things, so that when he...
I don't know. I don't know.
You know,
I know that God used, of all people, Pharaoh, who was trying to kill all the firstborn, to preserve the one God would use to lead his people out. I love the irony of that. Oh yeah, the one that got away, he grew up in your house. Thanks for feeding him so well all those years. Appreciate it.
And his own mother
Yeah.
breastfed him. That's
Exactly.
I love that part.
Right? I mean, only God could come up with this. Right?
And she got paid to do it.
Yeah. We forget, you know, to put that all back together when we get over to the plagues. You forget to make the connections of, wait a minute, weren't you the guy? Yeah, you were that guy. Anything else?
Yeah, I think for me, I spend way too much time trying to plan out and figure out what my life is. And I don't take time to stop and listen. Maybe I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what God's going to tell me or what he's going to say to me, you know? And
Right?
you know,
Because our plans are so much better.
Yeah, I'm so comfortable in the plan of my life, you know? You're right.
Right? Right. I know. I was laughing because, you know, I'm saying we all plan. You know, we plan or when you were 18, you remember thinking, if I could just get out of this house and all these people tell me what to do, I know what I'm going to do with my life, and I know what it's going to look like, and it's not going to be like all these other people, because I'm going to do this, and I'm going to have that, and I'm going to be this. Because, you know, you're invincible when you're 18, right? How many of those plans worked out? How many of those plans, thank God, never worked out, right? Let's start with some of those. What we plan, we can't make accomplished anyway. I don't have the power to make it happen. I can plan all I want to. I can't make it happen. So, yeah, me planning for me has been such a spectacular thing for me historically. I should continue to do that. Never. Never. Nothing, anything he comes up with is assured. I mean, it's going to work. And he's going to take care of me, and he's going to provide for me. And the outcome isn't even on me. It's not my responsibility. The outcome is totally his. Why we continue to wrestle with him, I don't. It's just a lack of faith. I mean, for all of us, it's a lack of faith.
Scary.
Yeah, right. Because he's going to mess up. You know what I'm saying? Our logic is so flawed. Cause what? Cause he's gonna mess up? No, I'm the one that drives it in the ground like a dart. He never messes up. He's always spot on. Yeah.
But it's not comfortable.
Why is it
It's not
scary?
what we think
No.
we're gifted to do.
No, no.
For all of those reasons.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm very intrigued with this upper rooms
Yeah.
because,
Upper story.
I mean, that's true today.
The upper story is going on.
Upper story,
Yes.
upper room, that's.
It is
what I
still
look
going
at.
on.
But it's still going on and we. don't
We are
know.
a link in the chain,
That's right.
just like they were.
And